What would you do if you were just trying to study, and a stranger decided you were a threat? For 16-year-old Jamal Hayes, a quiet afternoon at Starbucks turned into a public nightmare. A white woman, fueled by prejudice, called the police on him for simply existing in her space. She thought she had all the power. She thought the law was on her side. But she had no idea who she was messing with. She was about to come face to face with his mother, a woman who doesn't just uphold the law, she is the law. Stick around to watch this Karen get the shock of her life when the power dynamic doesn't just shift, it shatters. The late August air in Georgetown was thick and heavy, the kind of humidity that clung to your skin like a second layer of clothing. Inside the Starbucks on Wisconsin Avenue, the air conditioning offered a welcome, if slightly overzealous, respite. The familiar scent of roasted coffee beans and steamed milk was a comforting constant in the bustling heart of one of Washington, D.C.'s most affluent neighborhoods. 16-year-old Jamal Hayes had claimed a small two-person table near the window. His worn copy of The Souls of Black Folk by W.E.B. Du Bois lay open next to his laptop, its screen displaying a half-written essay for his AP U.S. history class. Jamal was a tall, lanky kid with a thoughtful expression that often made him seem older than his years. He was dressed in a simple gray hoodie and jeans, his earbuds nestled in his ears, playing a low-key, lo-fi hip-hop mix that helped him focus. He'd been coming to this particular Starbucks for the past year. It was a short walk from his school and provided the perfect white noise for studying. He was a regular, and the baristas knew his order by heart. A venti iced green tea, unsweetened. He was so engrossed in his work trying to articulate the concept of double consciousness that he didn't immediately notice the woman who sat down at the table next to him. She arrived in a flurry of expensive-sounding fabrics and the faint, sharp scent of a designer perfume. Her name was Susan Miller, a partner at a prestigious K Street law firm, and she carried herself with an air of unshakable entitlement. She placed her leather briefcase on the empty chair at her table with a decisive thud, her perfectly manicured fingers tapping impatiently on her phone. Jamal first became aware of her when he felt a distinct shift in the atmosphere. It was a subtle prickle of unease on the back of his neck. He glanced up and saw her staring at him, her lips pursed into a thin, disapproving line. Her gaze flickered from his face to his laptop, then to his book, and back again. He offered a small, polite smile, the kind you give a stranger in a shared space, and turned back to his screen. But the feeling of being watched didn't go away. A few minutes later, Susan stood up and walked to the counter. Jamal could hear her voice, though he wasn't trying to listen. It had a sharp, demanding edge. "Is there anything you can do about the noise?" she asked the barista, a young woman named Chloe with a nose ring and a perpetually patient smile. Chloe glanced around the bustling cafe. "Ma'am, it's the afternoon rush. It's always a bit loud." "No, not that," Susan said, lowering her voice to a conspiratorial whisper, though it was still loud enough for several people to hear. She gestured discreetly with her head towards Jamal's table. "The music. It's very distracting." Chloe looked over at Jamal, who was still seemingly lost in his work, his earbuds firmly in place. "Ma'am, he's wearing headphones." Susan let out an exasperated sigh as if dealing with a particularly dense child. "I can still hear it. It's a thumping sound. It's very disruptive. This is a place of business." Chloe, clearly unconvinced but trained in the art of de-escalation, just nodded. "I'll see what I can do." Susan returned to her table, her expression one of vindicated righteousness. Jamal had heard the exchange. He discreetly pulled one earbud out. The only sound was the gentle, instrumental beat, barely audible even to him. He knew this wasn't about the music. He'd seen this look before, felt this specific brand of scrutiny. It was the look that questioned his presence, his right to occupy space. He pushed the feeling down, determined not to let her ruin his focus. He had an essay to finish. But Susan Miller was not one to be ignored. 10 minutes later, she flagged down a staff member who was clearing tables. "Excuse me," she said, her voice dripping with condescension. I need you to speak to that young man." The staffer, a college student named Ben, looked confused. "Is there a problem, ma'am?" "He's been here for hours," Susan declared, her voice rising. "He bought one small drink and he's just sitting here, taking up a table. I have important work to do, and people like him are treating this place like their personal office." Ben glanced at Jamal's large iced tea, which was still half full. "Ma'am, he's a paying customer. He's welcome to be here." "For how long?" Susan challenged. "Is there no policy? He's making me uncomfortable. He keeps staring at my things." This was a blatant lie. Jamal had been meticulously avoiding her gaze. He felt a hot flush of anger and humiliation creep up his neck. He could feel the eyes of other customers turning towards their two tables. A young woman sitting a few feet away, a Georgetown student, looked at Susan with open disdain. An older man in a business suit shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Jamal decided to intervene. He pulled out his other earbud and turned to her, his voice calm and steady, just as his mother had taught him. "Ma'am, I'm not bothering you. I'm just studying." Susan recoiled as if he had screamed at her. "Now he's being aggressive," she said to Ben, her voice trembling with manufactured fear. "I don't feel safe. He's being hostile." "I'm not being hostile," Jamal said, keeping his hands flat on the table. "I just want to be left alone to do my work." The Georgetown student spoke up. "He's right," she said, looking directly at Susan. "You've been harassing him since you sat down. It's completely out of line." Susan whirled on the student. "You stay out of this! You have no idea what's going on!" She turned back to Ben, her face a mask of indignation. "Are you going to do something, or do I have to call the police?" Ben looked overwhelmed, completely out of his depth. "Ma'am, there's no need for that." But Susan had already pulled out her phone. Her fingers flew across the screen. "Yes, I'd like to report a disturbance," she said, her voice now filled with a chilling sense of authority. "At the Starbucks on Wisconsin Avenue, there's a man who is refusing to leave. He's been harassing me and I feel threatened." She paused, then added the words that would change everything. "He's a black male, about 6'2". He looks very agitated." Jamal's heart sank. He knew what this meant. He knew how this could go. Across the cafe, the Georgetown student had also taken out her phone. But she wasn't calling anyone. She had opened Instagram, hit the Go Live button, and aimed her camera directly at Susan Miller. The caption was simple and damning. "Karen in Georgetown calling the cops on a black kid for studying. At your Starbucks, Karen, beer black in D.C." The storm had broken. The quiet cafe had become a stage, and the whole world was about to be invited to watch. The 10 minutes between the 911 call and the arrival of the police car felt like an eternity. The atmosphere in the Starbucks had curdled. The low hum of conversation had died, replaced by a tense, watchful silence. The only sounds were the hiss of the espresso machine and the frantic tapping of Susan Miller's fingers on her phone, presumably texting a blow-by-blow account to someone who would validate her actions. Jamal sat frozen at his table, a cold knot of dread tightening in his stomach. He wanted to pack his things and leave, to just walk out and end the confrontation, but he knew that would look like an admission of guilt. His mother's voice echoed in his mind, a mantra from 100 conversations. Stay calm, be respectful, know your rights, and never, ever run. The live stream was gaining traction with terrifying speed. The viewer count on the Georgetown student's phone ticked relentlessly upward. 100, 500, 2,000, 5,000. Comments flooded the screen, a torrent of outrage, support, and condemnation. "This is disgusting." What did he even do? Classic Karen. "Someone get the store's number." The hashtag #WhyStarbucksKaren was beginning to trend in the D.C. area. The digital world was now a participant, an unseen jury watching through a single, unblinking eye. A D.C. Metropolitan Police Department cruiser pulled up to the curb, its lights not flashing, a small mercy. A single officer stepped out. He was a white man in his late 30s, with a stocky build and a weary expression. His name tag read M. Miller. By a cruel twist of fate, he shared a surname with the woman who had summoned him. Officer Miller entered the Starbucks, his hand resting casually on his duty belt. His eyes scanned the room, and he immediately clocked the source of the tension. Susan shot her hand into the air, waving him over as if hailing a cab. "Officer, over here! Thank God you've arrived!" Officer Miller approached her table first, a standard procedure when responding to a complainant. "Ma'am, I'm Officer Miller. You called about a disturbance?" "Yes," Susan said, her voice filled with relief and drama. "This man," she pointed a trembling finger at Jamal, "has been harassing me. He's been camped out here for hours, making a scene, and when I asked the staff for help, he became aggressive and belligerent. I'm afraid of what he might do." Officer Miller's gaze shifted to Jamal. It was a look Jamal knew well, a quick professional assessment that took in his race, his size, his hoodie, and filed him away in a mental category. "Sir," the officer said, his tone shifting from concerned public servant to authoritative enforcer. "I'm going to need you to step outside with me." Jamal took a slow breath, keeping his hands visible. "Officer, with all due respect, I haven't done anything wrong. I was just studying." "That's not what she's saying," Officer Miller replied, his voice flat. "We can sort this all out, but I need you to come outside right now." The Georgetown student with the camera spoke up, her voice clear and steady. "Officer, for what it's worth, I've been here the whole time. She's lying. He did absolutely nothing. She started it." Officer Miller shot her an annoyed glance. "Ma'am, I need you to stay out of it. This is official police business." He turned back to Jamal. "Sir, let's go. Don't make this more difficult than it needs to be." Jamal knew he had to comply. Arguing would only escalate the situation. He slowly began to pack his things, carefully placing his book and laptop into his backpack. The simple, mundane action felt freighted with significance, as if he were packing away his dignity along with his belongings. Every person in the cafe watched him, their faces a mixture of pity, anger, and fear. The live stream camera followed his every move. The viewer count had now surpassed 20,000. Outside, the August humidity felt even more oppressive. Officer Miller led Jamal a few feet away from the Starbucks entrance, creating a small zone of interrogation on the public sidewalk. Susan Miller followed them out, standing a short distance away, her arms crossed, watching with a proprietary air. "All right, what's your name?" Officer Miller asked, pulling out a notepad. "Jamal Hayes." "Date of birth?" Jamal gave it to him. "You have any ID on you, Jamal?" "Yes, sir. It's in my wallet in my backpack. May I get it?" "Slowly," the officer commanded. Jamal carefully slid his backpack off his shoulders, placed it on the ground, and unzipped the front pocket. He retrieved his wallet and handed over his school ID. Officer Miller examined the plastic card, his eyes flicking between the photo and Jamal's face. "So, what's the story here?" the officer asked, though his tone suggested he'd already made up his mind. "Why were you harassing the lady in there?" "I wasn't harassing her," Jamal said, his voice even despite the adrenaline coursing through him. "She sat down next to me and started complaining about my music, but I had headphones in. Then she complained to the staff that I'd been here too long. I never even spoke to her until I tried to tell her I wasn't bothering her. She said you were aggressive. I told her I just wanted to be left alone. My voice was never raised." From her perch near the door, Susan chimed in. "He's lying, officer. He was glaring at me. He has very aggressive eyes." The absurdity of the comment was lost on Officer Miller. He was running a script. "You have any priors, Jamal? Ever been in trouble before?" "No, sir. I've never been in any trouble." "Where do you go to school?" "Georgetown Day School." This gave the officer a moment's pause. GDS was one of the most elite private schools in the city. It didn't quite fit the profile he was building in his head, but the pause was fleeting. "Look, son," he said, adopting a tone of weary paternalism. "Here's what's going to happen. This lady wants to press charges for harassment, At the very least, the store can have you trespassed, meaning if you come back here, you'll be arrested. The best thing for you to do right now is just apologize to the lady. We can all go on with our day, and you can find somewhere else to do your homework." Jamal stared at him, incredulous. "Apologize? For what? For studying?" "For causing a disturbance," Officer Miller said, his patience beginning to fray. "You're attracting a crowd." He gestured to the small group of people who had gathered on the sidewalk, many of them with their phones out recording. The Georgetown student was still live, her camera held high. "I didn't cause the disturbance," Jamal said, his voice hardening for the first time. "She did. And I'm not apologizing for something I didn't do." The officer's jaw tightened. "All right, son. You want to do this the hard way." He took a step closer. "Put your hands behind your back." The crowd gasped. The live stream comments exploded. The algorithm, fed by a surge of shares, comments, and outrage, was now pushing the video to a national audience. The viewer count jumped past 50,000. Somewhere in a quiet, sterile office in the J. Edgar Hoover building, a communications aide's phone began to buzz incessantly. The storm was no longer just in Georgetown, it was everywhere. The officer's command, "Put your hands behind your back," hung in the humid air, sharp and ugly. For a moment, the world seemed to slow down. Jamal felt a jolt of pure, cold fear, a primal terror that shot through his veins and made his breath catch in his chest. This was the moment every black parent in America warns their child about. The moment a situation can spiral irrevocably into tragedy. "On what grounds?" Jamal asked, his voice shaking slightly but still laced with a defiance he couldn't suppress. "Am I being arrested? What is the charge?" Officer Miller seemed taken aback by the question, by the procedural formality of it coming from a teenager in a hoodie. "You're being detained for investigation of harassment," he snapped, his authority challenged. "Now I'm not going to ask you again." Susan Miller, watching from a few feet away, looked triumphant. This was the validation she had craved. The system was working, confirming her fears, punishing the source of her discomfort. She took a step forward, emboldened. "He's probably got drugs in that backpack, officer," she said, her voice loud enough for the growing crowd to hear. "You should search it. People like him, they're always up to no good. He probably doesn't even go to school around here." The accusation was a lit match tossed into a puddle of gasoline. A wave of murmurs rippled through the onlookers. "That's a racist-ass thing to say!" a man in a cycling outfit yelled from the edge of the crowd. "She's just concerned," another woman countered, clutching her purse. "This neighborhood has been going downhill." The Georgetown student with the live stream stepped forward, her camera pointed directly at Susan. "Ma'am, you're on a live video with over 75,000 people watching. Would you like to repeat your baseless and racist accusation?" Susan's face flushed a blotchy red. She hadn't fully grasped the reality of the live stream until that moment. She looked at the phone, then at the faces in the crowd, a flicker of uncertainty in her eyes. But she had gone too far to back down now. She doubled down. "I am a concerned citizen," she announced, her voice shrill. "I have a right to feel safe. This young man was acting suspiciously, and I am within my rights to report that. This is my community." "It's his community, too," the student shot back. The confrontation was no longer just between Jamal and the officer. It had become a public forum on race, privilege, and prejudice, playing out on a Georgetown sidewalk. Officer Miller was losing control of the situation. He was a solo officer dealing with a non-violent but tense call that was now a public spectacle, being broadcast in real time. His training told him to de-escalate, but his ego, pricked by Jamal's defiance and the crowd's scrutiny, pushed him forward. "That's it," he said, his face set like concrete. "You're causing a public disturbance." He reached for Jamal's arm. Instinctively, Jamal pulled back. It was a small, reflexive motion, but in the supercharged atmosphere it looked like resistance. "Don't touch me," Jamal said, his voice low and firm. "He's resisting!" Susan shrieked. "He's resisting arrest!" Officer Miller grabbed Jamal's wrist, his grip like iron. "Stop resisting, son." "I'm not resisting," Jamal said, his voice rising in panic. He tried to stay planted, to be a rock, but the officer was stronger, twisting his arm behind his back. The pain was sharp and immediate. Jamal cried out, a sound of shock and fear that was captured by a dozen phones. The crowd erupted. "Hey, get your hands off him! He's just a kid! What are you doing?" The live stream was a chaotic blur of motion and shouting. The comments were a waterfall of pure rage. Justice for Jamal was now trending nationally. People were sharing links to the D.C. Metropolitan Police Department's complaint hotline. Someone had already identified the Starbucks location, and its Google reviews were being flooded with one-star ratings. Officer Miller was now fully committed. He managed to wrench Jamal's other arm back and fumbled for his handcuffs. The cold metal clicked against Jamal's wrist. The sound was deafeningly final. He was being arrested for studying, for being black in Georgetown. The humiliation was a physical weight, pressing down on him, stealing the air from his lungs. He thought of his father, a man who had died when he was 10, and how he had always told him to hold his head high. He thought of his mother, of the disappointment and fear she would feel. He was pushed forward, forced to bend over the hood of the police cruiser. The metal was hot from the sun. Officer Miller began patting him down, his hands moving roughly over Jamal's body. "What do you have in your pockets, Jamal?" "Nothing. My phone, keys." The officer pulled them out and tossed them on the hood. He moved to his backpack. "You do not have my permission to search my bag," Jamal said, his face pressed against the car. He was reciting the lines his mother had drilled into him, even though they felt useless now. "It's a search incident to arrest," Officer Miller grunted, unzipping the main compartment. He pulled out the AP history textbook, the copy of The Souls of Black Folk, a binder full of notes, and a pencil case. He found nothing. No drugs, no weapons, just the ordinary tools of a high school student. He seemed almost disappointed. He zipped the bag back up, leaving it on the sidewalk. The evidence of Jamal's supposed criminality was nothing more than a testament to his academic diligence. The irony was thick enough to choke on. The spectacle had reached its peak. A black teenager in handcuffs, his school books splayed on the ground, a triumphant white woman looking on, a frustrated police officer who had let a simple call escalate into a potential civil rights violation, all broadcast for the world to see. The pressure was immense. Officer Miller could feel the weight of tens of thousands of eyes on his back. He knew, on some level, that he had made a terrible mistake. But he was in too deep to see a way out. He just had to finish the process. He pulled Jamal upright and began to walk him towards the cruiser's back door. This was it, the point of no return. And then, a sleek black Chevrolet Suburban with tinted windows and government plates turned the corner and glided to a silent, decisive stop right in the middle of the street, blocking the police car. The driver's side door opened, and a man in a dark suit and earpiece got out. He walked around to the passenger side and opened the rear door. The crowd fell silent. The live stream camera zoomed in. A single, elegant black leather heel stepped out onto the pavement. The black heel that emerged from the Suburban was followed by a woman who commanded attention without demanding it. She was tall and poised, her hair styled in a chic, no-nonsense cut. She wore a perfectly tailored navy blue suit that spoke of power and purpose. Her face was a study in controlled composure, her expression unreadable but radiating an intensity that seemed to suck the very air out of the humid afternoon. This was Dr. Evelyn Hayes, and she was Jamal's mother. She didn't rush. She moved with a deliberate, unhurried grace that was more intimidating than any display of anger. Her eyes, sharp and intelligent, swept over the scene, taking in every detail in a fraction of a second. Her son in handcuffs, his face a mixture of fear and relief, the aggressive, red-faced woman standing nearby, the flustered police officer holding her son's arm, the crowd of onlookers with their phones held aloft like votive candles. The man in the suit, a member of her security detail, stood by the open door, his presence a silent warning. Dr. Hayes walked directly towards the police cruiser, her path cutting through the crowd like a ship through water. People instinctively stepped back, creating a clear lane for her. The raw authority she projected was palpable, a force field that altered the dynamics of the entire scene before she had even spoken a word. "That's my son," she said. Her voice was not loud, but it cut through the ambient noise with the precision of a scalpel. It was calm, dangerously so. Officer Miller turned, startled by her sudden appearance. He saw a well-dressed, professional black woman. In his mind, she was probably a lawyer, maybe a concerned parent with some influence. He immediately shifted into a defensive posture. "Ma'am, you need to step back. This is an active police scene." Dr. Hayes did not stop walking until she was standing directly in front of him, close enough that he was forced to meet her gaze. She was slightly taller than him, and she used it to her advantage. "You will release my son," she stated. It was not a request. Officer Miller puffed out his chest, trying to reassert his dominance. "Ma'am, your son is being detained in connection with a harassment and public disturbance complaint. He was resisting—" "He was what?" Dr. Hayes interrupted, her voice dropping a degree, becoming colder, harder. "My son, Jamal Hayes, a minor, who has never been in any trouble in his life, was resisting arrest for, what, studying at a coffee shop?" She glanced at the Starbucks, then at Susan Miller, who was watching the exchange with a dawning sense of confusion and alarm. "We have a complainant," Officer Miller insisted, gesturing with his head toward Susan. "The situation escalated." "The situation," Dr. Hayes said, her eyes locking onto his, "appears to have been escalated by you. You have a 16-year-old boy in handcuffs on a crowded street based on the word of one woman without any corroborating evidence. In fact, based on the number of cameras I see, I suspect there is a great deal of evidence to the contrary." She looked past him for a moment, her eyes finding the Georgetown student, who was still streaming live. Dr. Hayes gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod, a silent acknowledgement. Jamal, who had been watching in stunned silence, finally spoke. "Mom," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I didn't do anything. I told him." Dr. Hayes's gaze softened for a fraction of a second as she looked at her son. "I know, baby," she said softly. Then her eyes snapped back to Officer Miller, and the steel returned. "Officer, what is your name and badge number?" "Officer Mark Miller, badge number 734, he recited automatically, the force of her presence compelling a conditioned response. "Officer Miller," she said, her tone formal and precise. "You are currently in violation of D.C. Metropolitan Police Department General Order 30421 regarding the detention of juveniles. You have also failed to follow protocol for de-escalation in a non-violent situation, potentially creating a false arrest scenario, which is a violation of my son's Fourth Amendment rights." Officer Miller stared at her, dumbfounded. He was used to dealing with angry parents, not ones who could quote departmental general orders from memory. "Ma'am, who are you?" Susan Miller, who had been watching this power play with growing unease, decided to intervene. The sight of another black person defending Jamal seemed to reignite her sense of righteousness. "She's probably not even his mother," she sneered. "She's probably part of his gang or something." The comment was so profoundly ignorant, so deeply racist, that it created a vacuum of stunned silence. The crowd gasped. The live stream comments went into a frenzy. Dr. Hayes turned her head slowly, her movements economical and deliberate, and fixed her gaze on Susan Miller. It was a look of such withering, analytical coldness that Susan physically flinched. Dr. Hayes said nothing to her. She simply held her gaze for a long, uncomfortable moment, dismissing her as completely and utterly irrelevant. Then she turned back to the police officer. She reached into the inner pocket of her suit jacket. Officer Miller tensed, his hand instinctively moving towards his weapon. Her security agent took a half step forward. "Easy, officer." Dr. Hayes said calmly. She moved slowly, deliberately, pulling out a slim black leather wallet. She didn't open it to show a driver's license. She flipped it open to reveal a gold badge and a credential card. "Officer Miller," she said, her voice ringing with the clarity of a bell. "My name is Dr. Evelyn Hayes. I am the director of the Federal Bureau of Investigation, and you are in a great deal of trouble." The words fell into the superheated air and everything stopped. Director of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. The title, spoken with such calm, indisputable authority, seemed to warp reality. The chaotic energy of the scene, the shouting, the tension, the fear, vanished, replaced by a silence so profound it was almost deafening. The crowd was motionless. The traffic on Wisconsin Avenue seemed to fade into a distant hum. Even the frantic scroll of comments on the live stream seemed to pause as viewers scrambled to process what they had just heard. Officer Mark Miller stared at the gold badge. The iconic eagle and shield seemed to burn with an almost physical heat. His mind struggled to connect the dots. The woman in the suit, the government plates, the security detail, the encyclopedic knowledge of MPD general orders. It was all horribly, terrifyingly real. The blood drained from his face, leaving him a pasty, sickly white. The hand that was gripping Jamal's arm went limp. His entire body seemed to deflate, the bluster and authority vanishing like a ghost at sunrise. He looked like a man who had just realized he'd stepped on a landmine and heard the click. But his shock was nothing compared to the utter disintegration of Susan Miller. Her jaw, which had been set in a mask of smug superiority, dropped open. A strange gurgling sound escaped her throat. Her eyes darted from Dr. Hayes's face to the badge, then to Jamal, then back to the badge. The world she had constructed. A world where she was the victim, where her feelings were paramount, where a black teenager was an inherent threat and the system would always back her up, had just been obliterated by a single sentence. She was not staring at a concerned mother. She was staring at the most powerful law enforcement official in the United States, and she had just accused her of being in a gang. Dr. Hayes let the silence hang for a few more seconds, allowing the full weight of the new reality to settle on everyone present. Then, she spoke again, her voice still calm, but now underscored with a razor's edge of command. "Officer Miller," she said, her eyes boring into his, "take the handcuffs off my son. Now!" Miller fumbled for the key on his belt, his hands shaking so badly he could barely fit it into the lock. The first cuff clicked open. He moved to the second, his movements clumsy and panicked. The second cuff fell away. Jamal brought his hands around, rubbing his wrists where the cold metal had chafed his skin. He looked at his mother, his eyes wide with a mixture of awe and relief that was almost painful to see. Dr. Hayes placed a gentle hand on Jamal's shoulder, a brief, reassuring touch. Then she turned her full attention back to the officer. "You have detained a minor without just cause, based on a single, uncorroborated and clearly biased complaint. You have escalated a non-violent situation through intimidation rather than de-escalation. You have conducted an illegal search of his property, and you have done all of this in full view of the public, bringing discredit upon your department and the badge you wear. Do you have anything to say for yourself?" Officer Miller opened his mouth, but no words came out. He looked like a fish gasping for air. He was completely and utterly broken. Dr. Hayes then shifted her gaze, and for the first time she truly addressed Susan Miller. "As for you, ma'am," she said, her voice dangerously soft. Susan flinched, as if she'd been struck. "You have filed a false police report, a prosecutable offense in the District of Columbia. You have publicly made slanderous and racially motivated accusations against a minor. You have instigated an event that could have, with a different officer or a different outcome, resulted in my son's death." Each word was a hammer blow, dismantling Susan's entire sense of self. The righteous indignation, the fear, the privilege, it all crumbled away, leaving behind a raw, pathetic panic. I just felt Susan stammered, her voice a weak, trembling whisper. What you felt, Dr. Hayes cut her off, her voice sharp, is irrelevant in the face of the facts. What you felt does not give you the right to weaponize the police against a child. What you felt has now led you to this moment. She gestured to the crowd, the phones, the unblinking eye of the live stream that was broadcasting Susan's humiliation to, by now, hundreds of thousands of people. I sincerely hope it was worth it. Just then, another MPD cruiser arrived, this one with a sergeant in the passenger seat. He was an older, weary-looking black man, and he got out of the car with the pained expression of a man who already knew his day was ruined. He had clearly been alerted by a frantic call from dispatch. He saw the government SUV, the agent in the suit, and the woman at the center of it all, and his face went grim. "Director Hayes," the sergeant said, his voice filled with a deep and profound respect. "Sergeant Henderson, I am so sorry for this." "Your officer, Sergeant," Dr. Hayes said, her tone leaving no room for excuses, "needs to be relieved of his duties immediately. My office will be in contact with your Internal Affairs Division and the U.S. Attorney's Office for the District of Columbia first thing in the morning. I expect a full and transparent investigation." "Yes, Director. Absolutely," Sergeant Henderson said. He turned to the now catatonic Officer Miller. "Miller, get in the car. Hand me your weapon." The public stripping of his authority was complete. Defeated, Miller unholstered his firearm and handed it to his sergeant, butt first. He shuffled towards the second cruiser, not daring to look at anyone, and got in the back. Dr. Hayes turned her attention back to Susan Miller, who was now weeping openly. Her carefully constructed facade shattered into a million pieces. "My son's attorney will also be in contact with you," she said, her voice devoid of any emotion. Then she turned her back on her, a final brutal dismissal. She put her arm around Jamal, pulling him into a firm, protective embrace. "Let's go home," she whispered into his hair. She led him towards the waiting Suburban, her security agent holding the door open. As they got in, the crowd, which had been holding its collective breath, erupted into spontaneous applause. The power dynamic hadn't just been reversed, it had been utterly and completely annihilated. The doors of the black Suburban closed with a solid, satisfying thud, sealing Jamal and his mother in a cocoon of quiet leather and tinted glass. The cacophony of the street, the applause, the sirens, the frantic chatter was instantly muffled, reduced to a distant, irrelevant hum. Inside, the only sound was Jamal's shaky breathing. The adrenaline that had kept him standing, kept him defiant, was now draining away, leaving a profound, bone-deep exhaustion in its wake. Dr. Hayes didn't say anything at first. She simply wrapped her arms around her son, holding him tightly, as a wave of tremors ran through his body. It wasn't just a hug of comfort. It was a hug of reclamation, a physical assertion that he was safe, that he was hers, that the world outside could not have him. Jamal buried his face in her shoulder, the scent of her perfume, a subtle, clean fragrance so different from Susan Miller's cloying scent, filling his senses. He was 16, almost a man, but in that moment, he was just a child who had been terrified and was now safe with his mother. "It's okay," she murmured, her voice losing its hard edge of command and softening into the familiar maternal tone he knew so well. "It's over. You're okay." Outside, the scene they had left behind was one of pure chaos and consequence. The live stream, which had peaked at over 500,000 concurrent viewers, was still running. The Georgetown student, now a citizen journalist of national renown, kept her camera rolling, capturing the swift and brutal aftermath. Sergeant Henderson was directing traffic, his face a grim mask of professionalism. His priority was to clear the scene and contain the damage, but the damage was already done and was metastasizing online at the speed of light. The video was everywhere. It had been ripped, reposted, and shared on Twitter, Facebook, TikTok, and every major news outlet's social media feed. FBI Chief Mom was trending alongside Eshti Justice for Jamal. The most immediate and spectacular downfall was that of Susan Miller. As Dr. Hayes's Suburban pulled away, the crowd's attention, no longer focused on the main event, turned on her. She stood alone on the sidewalk, a pariah in Chanel, her tears streaking her expensive makeup. The applause for Dr. Hayes died down and was replaced by a low chorus of boos and shouts of shame. Susan fumbled for her phone, perhaps to call for an ally, a husband, anyone who could rescue her. But her phone was already a vessel of her own destruction. The name of her law firm, Covington and Reed LLP, had been identified in the live stream comments within minutes of her being on screen. Now, the firm's social media pages were being bombarded. Their latest LinkedIn post about a successful merger was buried under thousands of comments demanding Susan Miller's termination. Her phone rang, but it wasn't a friend. It was David Covington, the firm's senior managing partner. She answered, her voice a pathetic whimper. "David, Susan," his voice was ice. "I have a dozen reporters calling my cell. The firm's server has crashed twice in the last 10 minutes. What in God's name did you do?" "It was a misunderstanding," she sobbed. "This kid, I felt threatened." "You felt threatened by the son of the director of the FBI?" Covington's voice was incredulous, laced with a fury that transcended the phone line. "Susan, we have a multi-million-dollar contract with the Department of Justice. We have spent 50 years building this firm's reputation, and you have set it on fire in the space of an hour because you couldn't handle a black kid studying near you." "What's going to happen?" she whispered, the question tasting of ash. "You are on indefinite unpaid leave, effective immediately," he stated, his voice cold and final. "Do not come into the office. Do not contact any of our clients. A courier is on his way to your home to collect your firm-issued laptop and phone. We will release a public statement in 30 minutes. Don't bother looking for it. You won't like it." The line went dead. Susan Miller slid down the wall of the Starbucks, her expensive suit crumpling on the dirty pavement, and let out a guttural sob of pure despair. Her life, as she knew it, was over, and the whole world had watched it happen. The consequences for Officer Mark Miller were just as swift, if less public. Back at the 2nd District Station, Sergeant Henderson escorted him directly to the office of the district commander. He was ordered to write a full report of the incident, a task that felt like signing his own professional death warrant. His badge and service weapon were formally logged and placed in an evidence locker. He was placed on administrative desk duty pending the full internal affairs investigation that everyone knew was just a formality. The director of the FBI did not make casual threats. His career in law enforcement was, for all intents and purposes, finished. He had gambled his badge on the word of a prejudiced woman, and he had lost everything. Even the Starbucks was feeling the heat. The company's corporate communications team, headquartered in Seattle, had been scrambled. Their stock price had taken a small but noticeable dip in after-hours trading. The CEO had been briefed. A crisis management meeting was underway. The incident was a PR nightmare, a visceral reminder of a similar incident in Philadelphia years earlier that had forced the company into a national reckoning. They knew they had to act decisively. As the Suburban navigated the D.C. traffic, heading towards the quiet tree-lined streets of their neighborhood, Jamal's phone, which his mother had retrieved from the hood of the cruiser, began to buzz incessantly. Notifications from friends, from classmates, from people he hadn't spoken to in years, were flooding in. They had all seen the video. They were all sending messages of support, of outrage, of awe. He was no longer just Jamal Hayes, high school student. He was a symbol, a hashtag, the center of a story that had captured the nation's attention. He looked at his mother, who was now on her own phone, her voice once again calm and authoritative, speaking to someone at the Department of Justice. He watched her, this woman of immense power and quiet strength, and for the first time, he began to understand the true weight of the world she navigated every single day. The fallout was just beginning. In the days that followed, the incident at the Georgetown Starbucks ceased to be just a viral moment and began its transformation into a case study in modern accountability. The machinery of the legal, corporate, and federal systems, spurred into motion by the direct involvement of a high-ranking official and the undeniable pressure of public opinion, began to grind forward with a speed and efficiency rarely seen in cases involving ordinary citizens. For Susan Miller, the public fallout was only the beginning of her professional demise. The statement from Covington and Reed LLP was released exactly 30 minutes after her call with the senior partner, as promised. It was a masterclass in corporate damage control. It unequivocally condemned her actions, stating they were in direct opposition to the values of diversity, inclusion, and basic human decency that are the bedrock of our firm. It announced her immediate suspension and the launch of an independent, third-party investigation into the incident. The message was clear. She was being surgically excised to save the institution. Her indefinite leave became a permanent termination less than a week later. But the consequences didn't stop there. The D.C. Bar Association, prompted by a flood of formal complaints from lawyers across the country who had seen the video, opened its own investigation into her conduct. The charge was conduct prejudicial to the administration of justice. Filing a false, racially motivated police report, they argued, was a profound abuse of the legal system she had sworn to uphold. The process would be long, but the consensus in the legal community was that she would be disbarred. Her career as a lawyer was over. She became a recluse in her own home, the Georgetown Karen of the viral video, a cautionary tale whispered on K Street. The investigation into Officer Mark Miller by the MPD's Internal Affairs Division was equally swift. The primary evidence was the unassailable 47-minute-long live stream video. It was a prosecutor's dream. It captured every moment: Miller's biased approach, his dismissal of witnesses who contradicted Susan's story, his illegal search of Jamal's backpack, his unnecessary escalation to physical force, and his clear violation of juvenile detention protocols. His own body camera footage only confirmed the narrative. Dr. Hayes did not need to exert any further direct pressure. Her initial statement was enough. The U.S. Attorney's Office for D.C., a federal body, announced it was opening a civil rights investigation into the incident, looking specifically at whether Officer Miller had engaged in a pattern of racially motivated policing. This federal oversight ensured the local investigation would be thorough and severe. Faced with irrefutable evidence and pressure from both his own command and the Department of Justice, Officer Miller was fired from the Metropolitan Police Department within 2 weeks. The police union filed a grievance, as was standard, but everyone knew it was a losing battle. He had become too toxic, his actions too public and indefensible. Jamal and Dr. Hayes watched these developments from the quiet sanctuary of their home. Dr. Hayes had taken a few days off, a rare occurrence. They talked for hours, not just about the incident, but about the systems it had exposed. Jamal's attorney, a sharp, formidable woman who was one of his mother's oldest friends, handled all the official interactions. A civil suit was filed against Susan Miller for defamation and emotional distress, and against the D.C. government for the actions of its officer. The goal was not financial gain. Any settlement would be donated to the NAACP Legal Defense Fund, but to create a formal record of wrongdoing, to force an admission of liability from the city. The corporate response was perhaps the most visible. Starbucks, desperate to avoid a repeat of the 2018 Philadelphia incident, went into overdrive. The CEO issued a personal video apology to Jamal and Dr. Hayes. He announced that the Wisconsin Avenue location would be temporarily closed for a community listening session, and that all 8,000 company-owned stores in the United States would, for the second time in the company's history, close for an afternoon for mandatory racial bias training. But this time, they knew a simple training video wouldn't be enough. The company's PR team reached out to Dr. Hayes' office, not for a photo op, but for a recommendation. They wanted to know which civil rights organizations they should partner with to design a new, more effective, and lasting training curriculum. Dr. Hayes, through her office, provided a list of leading sociologists and racial justice experts. Starbucks publicly committed to a multi-million-dollar partnership with these experts to create a program focused on third-place policing, training employees not just to avoid bias themselves, but how to safely de-escalate and manage biased behavior from customers without immediately resorting to calling law enforcement. They were learning, at great expense, that a coffee shop is not just a business, it is a social space, and that comes with social responsibilities. The machinery of accountability was working, but Jamal and his mother knew it was only working because of who she was. They spoke about the countless other Jamals, the young black men and women who didn't have the director of the FBI on speed dial. For them, an encounter like this could end in a false conviction, a tarnished record, or far, far worse. The thought was a sobering counterpoint to the victories that were unfolding. The fight was bigger than Susan Miller and Officer Miller. They were just symptoms. The disease was the system itself. The story of Jamal Hayes and his mother, the FBI director, became more than just a viral news cycle. It evolved into a cultural touchstone, a reference point in the ongoing national conversation about race, policing, and privilege. The sheer cinematic drama of the power reversal had captured the public imagination, making a complex issue accessible and deeply personal. It was one thing to hear statistics about racial bias. It was another to watch a Karen literally crumble when confronted by the ultimate authority figure who happened to be a black woman. This widespread attention created a unique opportunity, and Dr. Evelyn Hayes was not one to let an opportunity for meaningful change go to waste. While her public statements remained measured and professional, behind the scenes, she began to leverage the moment to push for substantive reform. She knew that the firing of one officer and the disbarment of one lawyer, while satisfying, did nothing to change the underlying conditions that allowed the incident to happen in the first place. Her first target was internal. Within the FBI, she commissioned a comprehensive review of the Bureau's own diversity and inclusion programs, as well as its training protocols for interacting with local law enforcement. She wanted to ensure that the FBI was not just a symbol of federal power, but a model for fair and impartial policing. Her more significant effort, however, was directed at Capitol Hill. The incident had given her immense political capital. She was invited to testify before the Senate Judiciary Committee at a hearing on police reform. The hearing room was packed. The media presence was enormous. Dr. Hayes did not use her time to recount the personal details of her son's ordeal. The world had already seen the video. Instead, she presented a calm, data-driven, and irrefutable case for national police reform standards. She spoke not as a mother, but as the nation's top law enforcement officer. "The incident involving my son," she began, her voice steady and clear, "was not an anomaly. It was a symptom of a systemic issue. We have 18,000 different police departments in this country, each with its own set of rules, its own culture, its own standards for use of force, de-escalation, and anti-bias training. This patchwork system is failing us. It creates inconsistency, erodes public trust, and produces tragic outcomes that are, in many cases, entirely preventable." She laid out a series of specific actionable proposals. She advocated for the passage of the George Floyd Justice in Policing Act, which had been stalled in Congress, but she also proposed new initiatives. She called for the Department of Justice to create a national database to track police misconduct, making it impossible for officers like Mark Miller, fired from one department, to simply get hired in another town. She proposed tying federal funding for police departments to their adoption of a set of national best practice standards, including mandatory comprehensive training on implicit bias, de-escalation, and the duty to intervene when another officer is using excessive force. She argued that calling the police should not be the default response for nonviolent social issues. "What happened in that Starbucks," she explained, "was a customer service issue that was turned into a criminal matter. We need to invest in and empower alternative response systems, mental health crisis teams, social workers, community mediators, to handle situations that do not require a badge and a gun. Her testimony was powerful precisely because of who she was. She could not be dismissed as anti-police. She was the police, at the highest level. Her arguments were not emotional appeals, they were pragmatic, evidence-based recommendations for improving public safety and strengthening community police relations. Her words carried the weight of both her personal experience and her professional authority. The hearing created a new wave of public pressure on lawmakers. Civil rights organizations, armed with the momentum of the Justice for Jamal movement, organized lobbying days and call-in campaigns. The video of Jamal's arrest was played on a loop on cable news, juxtaposed with clips of his mother's authoritative testimony. The narrative was simple and powerful. If this could happen to the son of the FBI director, it could happen to anyone. The seeds of change began to sprout. While the Full Justice in Policing Act remained a heavy lift in a divided Congress, key components of it began to find bipartisan support. The idea of a national misconduct registry gained traction. Several states, not waiting for federal action, began passing their own laws mandating stricter de-escalation training and creating civilian oversight boards with real teeth. The conversation had shifted. It was no longer a question of if reform was needed, but how it should be implemented. The incident had exposed a rot in the system so undeniably that even its most ardent defenders were forced to acknowledge the need for a cure. It was a slow, arduous process, but for the first time in a long time, it felt like real, systemic transformation was not just possible, but inevitable. A year later, the world was a different place. The echoes of that day in Georgetown had not faded. They had been integrated into the fabric of a changed society. The name Susan Miller had become a verb, a synonym for weaponizing white privilege. The video of Dr. Hayes revealing her identity was a permanent fixture in the Internet's Hall of Fame, a go-to meme for instant karma. But beyond the cultural artifacts, real, tangible change had taken root. Susan Miller was officially disbarred by the D.C. Bar. Her appeals were denied. She sold her Georgetown home at a loss, unable to bear the whispers and stares of her former neighbors, and moved to an anonymous suburb in another state, her public life erased. Officer Mark Miller's dismissal was upheld. The National Misconduct Registry, championed by Dr. Hayes and passed as part of a larger appropriations bill, ensured he would never carry a badge in any state again. He became a cautionary tale told to recruits at police academies across the country. The Starbucks on Wisconsin Avenue was brighter now. The company had followed through on its promises, working with the experts Dr. Hayes' office had recommended. The new training program, the Third Place Promise, was rolled out nationwide. It empowered employees with clear de-escalation techniques and, crucially, provided them with a direct line to a corporate resolution team and local social service providers, creating multiple options before a 911 call was even considered. The Georgetown location now had a small plaque near the counter, discreet but clear. This is a safe and welcoming space for all members of our community. The civil suit was settled out of court. The D.C. government admitted no wrongdoing, a standard legal maneuver, but paid a substantial sum. As promised, the entirety of the settlement was donated by the Hayes family to the NAACP Legal Defense Fund, where it was used to fund litigation on behalf of individuals who had faced similar injustices without the benefit of a powerful parent. Jamal Hayes was now 17 and preparing for his senior year. The experience had changed him. It had stolen some of his youthful innocence, but it had replaced it with a profound sense of purpose. He had become a passionate and articulate advocate for youth justice, speaking at his school and at local community events. He was no longer just writing essays about W.E.B. Du Bois. He was living the struggle, actively working to tear down the veil of double consciousness. He had found his voice not in spite of the trauma, but because of it. One warm evening in late summer, almost a year to the day after the incident, Jamal and his mother sat on the back porch of their home. The scent of jasmine hung in the air, and the sky was a brilliant canvas of orange and purple. It was a peaceful scene, a world away from the chaos of that afternoon. "I saw the new Starbucks training video online," Jamal said, scrolling through his phone. "It's actually pretty good." Dr. Hayes smiled, a genuine, tired smile. "It's a start," she said. "A small piece of a very large puzzle." "Do you think it's enough?" Jamal asked, his voice serious. "The training, the new laws, will it actually stop what happened to me from happening to someone else?" Dr. Hayes was silent for a moment, watching the last sliver of the sun dip below the horizon. "No," she said finally, her honesty unwavering. "It won't stop it completely. Prejudice is a poison that's been in the bloodstream of this country for a long time. You can't cure it with one law or one training seminar. But," she turned to him, her eyes full of a fierce maternal love, "it creates accountability. It raises the cost of bigotry. It makes it harder for the Susan Millers and Officer Millers of the world to act on their worst impulses without consequence, and it empowers the people who record the videos, the bystanders who speak up, the good officers who want to do the right thing. It doesn't fix everything overnight, but it bends the arc. It pushes us a little closer to justice." She reached out and took his hand. "What you did that day, staying calm, knowing your rights, standing your ground, that was courage, Jamal. The world changed a little bit that day, not just because of who I am, but because of who you are." Jamal looked at their joined hands, his long, artistic fingers intertwined with his mother's strong, capable ones. He felt a swell of pride and gratitude that was almost overwhelming. The scars of that day would always be with him, a reminder of the world's ugliness. But the memory of his mother's arrival, of the shift in power, of the fight they had waged and won together, that would be his armor. The world was still an unjust place, but it was not immutable. It could be challenged, it could be changed, and they, together, were proof. The story of Jamal and Dr. Evelyn Hayes is a powerful reminder that injustice thrives in silence, but crumbles in the face of courage and accountability. What started in a coffee shop became a national movement, all because one student was brave enough to hit record, and one mother refused to let her son become another statistic. This isn't just a story, it's a blueprint for change. It shows us the power we all hold in our hands, the power to document, to speak up, and to demand a more just world. If this story moved you, please help us spread the message by hitting that like button and sharing this video with your friends and family. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you won't miss our next video. More importantly, let's continue this conversation in the comments below. Share your thoughts, your experiences, and your ideas for how we can all work together to ensure that justice isn't dependent on who your mother is. Thank you for watching.